December 2010. We believe that Israel's security and the realization of the Palestinians' right to statehood are not opposing goals. On the contrary, they are intimately entwined objectives. We therefore call on both parties to return as soon as possible to direct negotiations towards a two-state solution on the basis of clear parameters.
Okay, well, let's get more on this vote now. And I'm joined by AlJazeera's senior political analyst, Marwan Bashara, and he joins us from the United Nations. So we just heard a little bit of what's been going on there at the United Nations. The US has vetoed this resolution, which was put forward by Palestinian leaders. Is anybody going to be surprised?
Well, actually, it is surprising in the sense that the last 6 weeks have presumably taught Washington a different lesson in history, that it has been in the wrong side of history for many years now. And one would have expected that instead of rewriting history, that the Obama administration would be this time, at this historic junction, on the right side of history. But they still voted against decolonialization, which is what's going on in the West Bank today as Israel colonizes the occupied Palestinian territories. Instead of joining the rest of the international community, or all 14 members, a resolution that's sponsored by more than 100 countries, Washington decided to stay on the sidelines, to stay alone with Israel as an obstructionist force, and that, in the context of what's been happening recently in that region, is surprising.
What kind of reaction do you think that there'll be in the Arab world, given all of the things that have been going on in the region? Is it likely to inflame Arab public opinion further? And then at the same time, the United States has been making this argument, or at least the argument is out there, that if it had abstained, it would have ended up angering Israel instead.
That's precisely the question that is on the mind of the Obama administration. It has been weighing its option, and I was in Washington the last week talking to people in Washington about this very particular draft resolution and what will Washington going to do. And there has been more or less a consensus in Washington that between inflaming Arab public opinion and inflaming the Israeli lobby in Washington, between inflaming the sentiments in the Arab and Muslim world and inflaming a sentiment in Congress, especially by the Republicans, the Obama administration has chosen the appeasing Israel, appeasing the lobby in Washington at the expense of its own national interest in the region and its own moral and presumed principled position towards people's freedom in the region, because many people in the region have been more or less tying the question of freedom for their own societies with freedom in Palestine. But as long as the United States, as long as Washington in particular, has been an obstructionist force to passing a simple resolution that's been drafted by the very own words of President Obama about the illegitimacy and, in this sense, the illegality of the settlements, that is very much what has been on the administration mind. And unfortunately, they voted the expedient way to please the politics in D.C. rather than to walk the on the right side of history and vote for also what's in the best interest of the United States, the region.
On a certain level, it is kind of bizarre. I mean, why would you veto a policy that is indeed based on your own past language about settlements? And why work then behind the scenes so feverishly to try to do everything that you could to stop this vote coming to the floor, and indeed trying very, very hard to try to water it down as much as possible?
On the politics side, Washington, the Obama administration, has been, as I said, very much in favor of pleasing, appeasing, being expedient when it comes to the beltway politics and making sure that there's no backlash within Washington or for its chances with the Israeli lobby or with the pro-Israeli voices in the United States come next elections. On the policy side, this is consistent with 20 years of U.S. policy towards the peace process that says keep the United Nations, keep the international community outside the resolution of this conflict. The problem with that is 20 years of failure of this process would have probably or should have convinced the decision makers in Washington to bring it back then to the International Committee and the Security Council. But yet, Washington, the Obama administration still opposes that, even though during those 20 years of peace process, the settlements in the occupied territories have quadrupled from 75,000 to 300,000 Jewish illegal settlers in the West Bank, and that's only outside East Jerusalem, where also, as an occupied territory, the settler community has doubled in that part of a future Palestinian capital.
All right, Marwan Basharaf. Marwan, thanks very much for joining us. The United States has named its new special envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan. He's retired diplomat Mark Grossman, who is expected to help manage Washington's often tense relationship with the Afghan President Hamid Karzai. Ties with Pakistan have also been soured further after the arrest of an American man over the killing of 2 Pakistanis. Well, joining me here in the studio is Kurt Volker, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Mr. Volker, thank you very much for coming and speaking with AlJazeera. So let me start by asking you, what makes Mark Grossman such a good candidate for this job? What kind of regional experience does he bring to the table?
He's a very accomplished diplomat. I know him very well. We work together in the State Department. He's been ambassador in Turkey. He was the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, which has global responsibilities. At the time he was Undersecretary was the time that we began our efforts in Afghanistan. He's had relationships with people throughout the region for some time. And after government service as well, he remained very active, and I know that he's been to South Asia, and I know he has very good contacts there.
Okay, and now his predecessor, Richard Holbrooke, the late Richard Holbrooke, was tough, and he had a reputation for being somewhat abrasive and rubbing Hamid Karzai up the wrong way on more than one occasion. We hear that Mark Grossman is sort of the opposite of that. He's very low-key, but I guess that doesn't mean that he's quite going to be a pussycat either, is he?
No, not at all. No, Mark has a very different style. He's a very thoughtful person. He's very good at bringing people together. He's very good at strategizing about how to bring people together. He's not going to go and bang heads. He's not going to embarrass people publicly. But at the same time, he's very smart and very tough.
But how much strategizing is he going to be allowed to do? I mean, is he going to have some leeway here, or is he effectively going to be Washington's yes man?
Well, no, I don't think that's the point, because Washington is going to need someone to bring ideas to the table, to try to put things together. That's what Richard Holbrooke did. It's certainly what Mark Grossman's going to do. He's going to have a very tough job, though, a very difficult job, both because of the conditions in Afghanistan, because he's managing a new phase of our engagement where we're going to be handing off to Afghan responsibility over time and diminishing the U.S. resources committed, with all the difficulties in Pakistan and all the interagency difficulties here in Washington.
So what do you think is the one big best idea that he could bring to the region?
I think that it's going to be continuing to pursue the effort to help the Afghans develop the capacities to take responsibility for their own security in their own country, to permit the conditions for a withdrawal.
Right, but some have said that sort of effectively adds up to just blaming Hamid Karzai for all of the problems. You know, this is kind of double speak, you know, taking responsibilities, sort of like saying, you know, blame Hamid Karzai. There's got to be a better strategy than that, hasn't there?
No, I don't see that as blaming Karzai. You know, think about the police forces or think about the military forces